As many of you know, this past week, as many of you know, last weekend my grandmother passed away. She was 98. Was able to be there and anoint her as she was right before she died. It was really beautiful. But this past week we had her funeral service. It was on Wednesday, so I know a lot of people here were praying and very, very appreciative. Me, my family, everybody. But one of the things about that was really interesting about the funeral services is it was one of the first times that side of our family has gotten together in a really long time. I've shared this before, but when we were growing up, right, summertime breaks, things like that, we didn't get babysitters. We would just go take over my mom's house. So it was really cool to just kind of be able to be with all of my cousins. Who, for much of my young life, were like brothers and sisters, right? They were like an extension of my family. And it was one of the first times in a few years now that all of us, or so many of us, got together like that. And sad that it was around for a funeral, but just something that was really interesting. For a funeral, usually you have, the bodies out in front and people come up and pay their respects. And then the family is all kind of around, right? So my mom and her 5 brothers were all together kind of near the coffin and everything else. But what had happened was our whole, all of my cousins, my generation, we all kind of migrated over to one corner and we were just kind of visiting. And it was cool. We were catching up, picking on each other, joking around, talking way too much for being in church, right? Doing all the things, but it was just great to kind of catch up. And as people would make their way through the line and share their condolences and things, we might get pulled by somebody who would say, "Oh yeah, thank you," have a short conversation. But then all of our all of the cousins we would kind of migrate back into our little corner and we would talk and hang out and visit. It just kind of felt like old times, which was really, really interesting. We had the wake, we had the funeral, we had the burial, the little reception after. We did all the things. And we all kind of went home and went to our own thing. And my sister and I, we went over to my mom and dad's after and we were visiting. And my sister, we were both reflecting on this. We were just saying how it was nice and it was good to catch up and seeing how good everybody's doing and seeing everybody's kids and stuff like that. It was really beautiful to see. And my sister said something that just stuck with me all week. She said, we should really try and get together like that more often. And it was a great idea. I think it would be so much fun. It would be awesome to get together. And then you start thinking about, well, if we say we're going to do that, then, well, these kids play baseball, and these kids play basketball, and these kids, they got these things going on. We'll never be able to do it. You come up with the 55 reasons why not. But it's just it was something that stuck with me for a while that we wanted to kind of rehash or kind of re-spark that moment of all of us being together. And I couldn't understand why it stuck with me as long as it did. But as I was driving home and then as I was reflecting on it after, I think, for me, one of the reasons why that was it kind of stuck with me was because, and as sad as it is, my grandma passing away, my grandpa passed away 10 years ago, but my grandma passing away, in a way, kind of closes a chapter. There's the person that kind of unified all of us, that kind of was the house that we all kind of went over to, the person that we knew, hey, we might be all over the place, but when Mama passes away, as sad as this is, we knew we were all going to be in the same room together. We knew that was going to happen at least one more time. Well, now that one more time is gone, and it almost feels like the chapter or a season is kind of closed. And now, all of a sudden, all of those good memories, all of that good time, all of that growing up together really is kind of, it's kind of done. And now it's a memory. There's a clear moment that now all of a sudden, what is becomes what was. And now it's a memory. And it was fun to reflect on, and it was fun to think about, but it's a memory. And it just kind of is. Now, I say that, I don't mean to kind of put a wet blanket on Sunday night, right? But I say that because I think at different points in our life, those kind of things happen. Sometimes it happens around a death. Sometimes it happens around good things, right? Somebody graduates. You graduate from high school. And now all of a sudden, like high school it shifts from being what is to what was. And like all the memories are now in a yearbook and they're on a shelf. And then you turn 35 and you're still looking back and thinking, man, I peaked in high school, right? Like it was like, oh, it was so cool. And I had so many good stories. And you talk and like you go to a reunion and you share some of those stories, but then like it's just a bunch of memories and you're just saying the same stories over and over and over and nobody really cares, right? Like you're just trying to relive, but it's never going to be again. In family life, in family life, right? Like it happens again. Like you get married and our dating relationship was because now marriage is. The buddies, like the guys I would go hang out with and do X, Y, and Z with, it was, now my wife is, right? I'm getting you back. Got you get back, girls. Like, right? Like, whenever, if you're thinking about, I just heard some, like, some people need to go to confession. That's not my fault. Anyway, but your first child, right? Your first child's born, and okay, now the spouse relationship, okay, that was now mom and dad is what is. There's a clear moment, I think, a lot of times in life where what is becomes what was, and a new is starts. Right? You follow me? Right? What is becomes what was, and a new is begins. Today, if we could talk to St. Peter, right? And we could pull St. Peter up and we could have he and I up here in the sanctuary talking. First of all, I would sit down and let him talk, right? But if we could pull him up and ask him like, at what was the most impactful moment in your life? Like what was the thing that happened that all of a sudden what is became what was and a new is began? I think he would say, read today's gospel. Because all of a sudden, what is that became the was is the fisherman, Peter. The fisherman named Simon from Capernaum. We hear repeatedly that every time Peter goes out to fish, right, he doesn't catch any fish, right? So the bad fisherman named Peter, right, of Capernaum. But that is today becomes a was. Because a random guy that lives in Capernaum came up to him and said, I want you to be my disciple. Like think about the discipline of what it means to be a fisherman in this time, right? They live in a small city, a small town that's right on the coast of the Sea of Galilee. That's where James, John, Andrew, and Peter, all four of today's apostles that are being called, right? They all live in this relatively small town. Jesus himself, right? He settles where? In this small town, in this place. It's not a very big place. It's smaller than Thibodaux. And if everybody knows each other's business in Thibodaux, then you know everybody knows each other's business in Capernaum. And what happens is that they're living in Capernaum. There are these four fishermen. And what happens is that every day, a fisherman, if they don't fish, they don't catch. If they don't catch, they don't eat. They don't live. So I have to believe that like the discipline in the life of a fisherman was wake up early, you go and fish, you come back, you sell your catch, you clean your nets, you get ready for bed because the next day you're waking up, you're going fish and on and on and on. It's a disciplined life. It's an ongoing thing. Well, what happens is in the monotony of his life, in the boring details of life, all of a sudden Jesus comes and interrupts Peter. Jesus inserts himself into Peter's life and looks at him and says, I want you to follow me. I want you to do something greater. I want you to do something bigger. I want what is to become what was. Because I got a new is for you. You'll be a fisher of men. Does this with Peter. Does this with Andrew. Does this with James. Does this with John. And all four of them, when Jesus says this and looks at them and invites them and says, I want you to be my disciple. I want you to follow me. I want to become the is of your life. Every one of them drop their nets and go. They drop their livelihood and they go. James and John, they leave their father. Their dad is in the boat with them. The one who probably taught them how to fish. The one who probably taught them the skill and the trade. They leave they leave the nest, literally, and they walk away from their dad. Why? Because Jesus says, I'm calling you to something different. You see, this is this invitation that happens to Peter, to James, to John, to Andrew, the same invitation that happens to the apostles in the first century is the same invitation that happens to us as well as Christians. You see, Jesus looks at us, and wherever we are right now, whatever your is, right? Whatever it is that right now you're dealing with, you're thinking about, the thing that's got you consumed, the monotony of your normal day, right? Whether you're a student, if you're working, if you're retired, if you're taking care of grandkids, whatever it is, like on a daily basis, God is looking at you and He says, I want to become your is. And what is needs to become a was. Like God is saying, I want to be the most important thing in your life. Now it might seem like, Father, what about my wife, my family? When God becomes the most important thing in our life, it also affects those things. It makes us better at those things. But God is saying, I want to be what is in your life. Let me. Some of us may have a point in our life that we can look back and say oh yeah, I knew that moment. That's whenever I just gave my life over to God, right? But a lot of us probably were baptized as infants and somebody spoke on our behalf. But many of us probably have experienced on a retreat or something like that. God said, I want to be, and we were yes, and it was great. And then boom, dropped the nets and been following ever since, and awesome, and it's something we need to celebrate. But if not, God is continuing to call you right now and saying, I want to be what is in your life. I don't want to be an afterthought. I don't want to be second place. I want to be what is. And there's a reason. There's a reason why there's a reason even why Jesus does it today, for the apostles. You see, our first reading and our gospel today both talked about the first reading came from the prophet Isaiah, and our gospel quoted the prophet Isaiah. Because what they're talking about with this whole idea of being in darkness and having seen a great light is that the prophet Isaiah is talking about the 12 tribes of Israel that broke apart. The first covenant, one of the first covenants, the Old Testament covenant, where God establishes these 12 tribes of Israel in the Jewish faith. What happens is that through different corruption and through different kind of infighting and different sin, what happens is these 12 tribes of Israel, they break apart. They're not unified anymore. They don't follow. There's infighting. There's a division in the kingdom of Israel. All of the things that corrupted the Old Testament covenant. It goes on, and Isaiah is saying is that this darkness should not exist, but God will bring about light to defeat the darkness. And today, what happens is that He begins that process by finding His first 4 of the disciples. He's going to find 8 more. The 12 disciples are going to replace the 12 tribes of Israel. So what Jesus is doing today is He's saying, I'm going to let the people who live in darkness see a great light. And that what's going to happen is we're going to establish a church, a family, and that family is going to be my light in the world. Think about Pentecost. How did they know they received the Holy Spirit? Tongues of fire on their head, and they went out. My light will go into a dark world. Well, it's not just for the apostles. It's not just for the apostles who then made more apostles, and then the apostles, and generations of apostles who are now the bishops. It's meant to be a church that is a light in a dark world. When I was the first time I was assigned at St. Thomas, I was a deacon, and it was right as I was finishing up seminary, and I loved my time here, and it was awesome. One of the things I did, I taught a class on the spirituality of the laity. And I'm more and more convinced that the more I've kind of read on this and seen and looked at it, that the spirituality and the role of the laity in our Catholic Church is probably one of the best kept secrets ever. Because most of the people in the church, most of the people that are involved in the church, that are part of the church, right, the structure of the church, most of you are lay faithful. Because you're not the priest, you're not a nun, you're not a deacon, right? You're not a bishop, like you're a lay person. What does that mean? What's the role that you're supposed to play? Well, a lay person is a baptized person that's been sent by Christ, right? That's been commissioned by Christ to do what? To bring him to the secular world. The secular sphere, to be on the front lines in the battle. Meant to be on the front lines out in the world. The reason why I bring that up is because whenever, I know I've had moments where I felt like I wanted to get involved in the church, like when I was in college and then when I was in high school, and saying, like, I remember going to people and saying, hey, I really want to get involved. What can I do with the church? And some very, very well-intentioned person at the church looked at me and said, well, you could read. And I'm like, oh, thank you. But I really want to get involved. And they're like, you can read, or you can sing, or you can pass the collection. Now, real quick, my people that sing, my people that read, my people that pass the collection, I love you dearly. I thank you dearly. But I will say, and I'm confident to say this because I know the people that read, that sing, and do those things here in our church. I know this isn't the expression of the totality of your Catholic faith. If the totality of your Catholic faith is the 2 minutes of reading the prophet Isaiah, saying words that nobody really understands, with phrases that people really don't understand, if that's the totality of what it means to be Catholic in your life, then we are doing a really, really poor job. Because being a Catholic is not about being active on Sunday necessarily. It's about being fed on Sunday and being commissioned and sent and released upon the world. So that in our families, in our workplaces, in our schools, that we become light bearers. We become people who bring the presence of Christ with us wherever we go. Whether we're sitting at a football game, watching a movie, or hanging out with friends, that we bring Jesus with us into the rest of our life. If we're not living as an active church out there, then the darkness is going to continue to win. Because the people in darkness have seen a great light. That promise that Jesus said was what requires us to be actively engaged. It requires us to be part of the solution, part of His presence in the world. What does sin do? It breaks down our flame, if you will. It hurts our flame. It sometimes, mortal sin will extinguish our flame. That we can't bring the light into the darkness. But when we come to Mass, what's happening is that God's feeding the fire within us. And He wants to set the world on fire. May we be agents of arson, if you will. May we be ones that are sent out to set the world on fire with the presence of the Holy Spirit. How? By very simply, by being the holiest parent you possibly can. By being the holiest 16-year-old you possibly can. By not watching pornography for one day. By not saying a disparaging thing about that person. By trying to spend time with someone who just really aggravates you. That's how we become God's presence in the world around us. See, I've said it before, that the last words of the Mass are not a suggestion. They're a command. So when Jesus was telling us, when Jesus saw Simon Peter, when he saw Andrew, when he saw John, when he saw James, and he called them, he said, I want to be what is. In your life, is Jesus what is? Or is he just a good idea? Today, when we come to this Mass, we ask the Lord to break through the noise of our own life, the darkness of our own life, and allow us to receive and then share His light. Because we don't want to go back. We don't want to go back to a life that's just boring and monotonous. Waking up early, getting our work done, going to bed, to do it tomorrow. But instead, let our faith consume us. That when we leave this church, we look, act, and sound different. That we spread the Lord's gospel. That we become Christ's presence in the world. That we ultimately set the world on fire around us. That's been the call of the church from the very beginning. May we today, here in this community, in this town, answer that call.